Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Free Professional Development Series. Today is the second in the summer series. My name is Brendan Ryan. Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which our schools, our families and our communities work and play. We pay our respect to elders of the past, the present and those that will live their collective future. Today I am delivering from Wadawurrung country on behalf of the CEP. So welcome everybody to today's session. And at the moment you won't be able to see me because we're having some technical problems. Our focus of today's session is quality teaching rounds, and we have a number of guests from University of Newcastle to speak to us today. It's now my pleasure, I hope, to introduce the Chief Executive Officer of Country Education Partnership, Mark McClay. Over to you, Mark.
I think Mark might be joining us in a minute, Brendan.
Okay, no worries. Okay, we'll move on then.
Perfect.
As I said, today's session has a focus on quality teaching rounds. Our session, as usual, will be of 1 hour's duration and will conclude by 5 p.m. The program is being recorded and obviously there's an opportunity to review the session whenever it's convenient to those that are online, and all the past sessions are also available online. If anybody has a question during the course of the program, please record your questions in the chat box and we'll endeavour to respond to those questions today. And before you sign off today, we would really it's really important if you would complete the survey of the session. We use that feedback to provide some direction as far as future programs are concerned. So I can now hand over to CEP Manager Maurice Billy, who will introduce today's guests and facilitate today's discussion. Over to you, Maurice.
Thanks, Brendan, and hello everybody, and hello to our guests that are joining us today. We know it's that very final hurdle towards the end of the year as school is starting to get to that place where Christmas isn't too far away, but there's still plenty of work to be done in these last few weeks. So we're really grateful that a number of you are able to join us, and we also know that a lot of people are able to catch up with the recordings down the track. We've got a couple of really interesting people, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our first speaker, which is Dr. Sally Patfield, who's a lecturer at the University of Newcastle. And Sally, as I sort of welcome you in, I know that having a look a bit about your background, that you've got a background of being brought up in rural New South Wales. You firsthand the inequalities of the education system. You know very well about that. And today, through your research, you're working hard to change the thinking and policy to make things fairer for all. And obviously for us, with a real rural focus in our work, I'd be really interested to hear what you've got to say and what your research tells you about the issues of equity and social justice and equality and those sorts of things, particularly when it pertains to rural education and broader. So without further ado, Sally, can I welcome you, and can I thank you for joining us? And can I ask you, is it Newcastle or Newcastle? What do you say?
Newcastle.
That's what I thought. So,
yeah.
But we know that, I know coming from the West, we have Albany and Albany that people sometimes have conversations about. So pronunciation is interesting. So Sally, thank you. And I've been to Newcastle, beautiful place, and really looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. So I'm going to share some slides. So just bear with me for a moment. I'm not used to this platform, but I think I know what to do.
Looking good.
So I'll just change that. Right, so hopefully you can see the whole slide.
Yep.
Perfect. So I do want to begin my presentation this afternoon by acknowledging that I'm joining today from Wabikal country, so here at the University of Newcastle, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous colleagues that are joining us today as well. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit today about our approach to professional development called Quality Teaching Rounds, and specifically how we've adapted this approach through a form of professional development we now call Quality Teaching Rounds Digital, which has been specifically designed with and for rural educators. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the development of this approach to professional learning, and then highlight some of the research that we've conducted on this approach to PL, and then also highlight some of what we found in the research in terms of the benefits and the value for rural educators and schools. So I'm not sure, in terms of who's here today and people listening to the recording later on, I'm not sure how many people will be familiar with Quality Teaching Rounds, but if you're not, just a little bit of background on that, that it draws on the tenets of instructional rounds and professional learning communities, and combines that with an evidence-based pedagogical framework, which is the quality teaching model. So generally, the approach to PL starts off with schools sending a number of their teachers to one of our workshops that introduces the quality teaching model and the quality teaching rounds approach. And then educators go back to their schools or across schools and form a professional learning community, and they engage in this process of quality teaching rounds. So over the course of, so usually in a professional learning community, there'll be usually about 3 or 4 teachers. And then over the course of the 4 days, usually spread out across a term or 2 terms, they engage in this process. So first of all, over the day, so you can kind of think about these steps as occurring over the course of a day. They engage in a reading discussion. And the purpose of that is really to not only develop a shared knowledge base on an educational topic, maybe of something that's of interest to the school or something that's topical within education, but also to build that sense of professional community within the PLC. They then do a lesson observation. So one member of the professional learning community teaches a lesson observed by all others. And importantly, throughout the rounds process, each member of the PLC has a lesson observed. Then they engage in a process of coding. So using the lens and the language of the quality teaching model to code the observed lesson using the model. And then they return to the group and engage in a coding discussion. So here, the language and the lens of the model is used to structure a discussion, specifically about the lesson that was observed, but really extending that to think about teaching practice more broadly as well. So in terms of adapting that traditional approach to QTR for teachers in rural areas throughout Australia, we know from research that teachers in rural areas report a lot of barriers to participating in PD, particularly collaborative forms. And some of those challenges include things like cost, distance, time, and also access to casual relief teachers. So like I mentioned at the start, since we've been delivering and implementing QTR, we've offered the workshops that kind of start the process. We've offered the workshops in a number of different rural areas, particularly in New South Wales, but increasingly across other states and territories as well. And increasingly was also offered online workshops. However, we know from speaking to teachers through our Quality Teaching Academy, but also through our research, that they continue to sometimes experience challenges, particularly through access to casual relief teachers. And in terms of teachers' participation in QTR, it's that access to casual relief, which can be important in terms of teachers' participation in the workshop, but also having time off class to engage really quite deeply and meaningfully in the QTR process. We also know generally the traditional approach to QTR has often taken place where a PLC forms within one school, but that can also pose challenges for teachers who are working in many of the small schools located across the country in terms of, again, being able to participate and having time away from class. So in 2017, thinking about some of these challenges, we actually started to conduct some design experiments working with rural teachers to think about how we could adapt and tweak the approach to quality teaching rounds to use digital technologies to address some of these challenges. So ultimately, this resulted in our QTR digital approach to professional learning. So with this approach, like I said, it does involve digital technologies, and also it allows teachers to work within one school or form a PLC across schools. That really helps them to build that relationship and also alleviate some of the barriers and the challenges in terms of potentially a school being able to release a teacher or a group of teachers from class for a whole day. So if you think back to that initial approach, so this slide here just kind of shows the tweaks we've made in terms of QTR digital. So the reading discussion can be conducted via a software such as MS Teams or Zoom. The lesson observation, that can be conducted in real time via, again, Microsoft Teams, for instance. Or what often happens is that teachers or their PLC can actually use a previously recorded lesson that's shared with the group in advance. And then this element remains the same in terms of the PLC coding the lesson against the quality teaching model. And then finally coming together as a group to have that really rich and meaningful discussion about teaching in real time via Microsoft Teams. So for a number of years, that approach was really trialed through those design experiments and tweaked. And then eventually in 2021, we trialed the approach more broadly through a randomised control trial, which took place here in New South Wales. So basically what we did, this was a project that was funded by the Paul Ramsay Foundation and supported by the New South Wales Department of Education. And we really wanted to, again, work closely with regional and remote schools, but also small schools across the state as well. So through partnering with the department, we were able to recruit 127 teachers from 76 small regional and remote schools across the state. And because it was a randomised control trial, teachers were randomly allocated to either participate in QTR Digital in 2021 or to a waitlist control group. And the waitlist control group continued on with their usual professional development during 2021 and were then provided with the PD at the end of the study, so they could, again, also ensure that they were able to receive the benefits. And what I'm going to look at today is the interview data that we collected as part of this research. So as part of the research, we conducted interviews with a subsample of teachers from each group, which were initially during the baseline in term 1, and again at follow-up in term 4 to look at some of the changes and look at their perspectives over time in terms of the benefits and the value of QTR Digital. And I won't bore you today too much with the theory, but basically in terms of the case study data and the work we're doing in this space is we really argue and really want to highlight and demonstrate taking a strengths-based approach to professional learning in rural areas. And as I've highlighted there in the top quote is that I'm sure we all know this kind of metrocentric bias that can be embedded within the education system. So things like initial teacher education, professional development, recruitment and retention, not to mention the curriculum itself, all have this kind of a deeply embedded metrocentric bias that sometimes can position rural teaching and learning as a deficit, and that there's something that's a problem and it needs to be changed. So through taking this strengths-based approach and what we are referring to as recognitional justice, it builds on this idea that we need to respect and really valorize ways of being, knowing and working outside of cities, and that in rural areas that what the conditions of learning and teaching and being are actually unique and different. They're not deficit. So now in the final 10 or so minutes, I'm going to delve into two of the schools that we worked with in the RCT. And I just should note that these school names here are pseudonyms, and all participant names are pseudonyms as well. So using the interview data, I'm just going to highlight now some of the challenges that these schools were facing in terms of their everyday realities, but also the benefits of QTR Digital that they encountered along the way. So the first school here, Heron Central School. So as part of the research, we conducted interviews with 2 teachers and the principal. So Christy here is the principal at Heron Central, and just a reminder that these are pseudonyms. And at the school, what we often heard through the interviews, both at baseline and again in term 4, was the challenges of recruiting and retaining staff. And back in 2021, the school was staffed by 14 teachers, 4 primary and 10 secondary. And the school in the New South Wales Department scheme is classed as remote, but you can see here from the quote from Christy that it doesn't come with the same incentives as other regional schools. And you can see here in her quote, she's kind of alluding to the fact that the school's kind of falling through the cracks. So it's not really enticing the teachers who might be wanting to move or relocate to some of these areas because of financial benefits. So it's kind of this sense of the school feeling overlooked. And quite starkly, what we heard as well from all of the teachers we interviewed was this ongoing challenge of teacher recruitment and teacher retention. And quite starkly as well, that the principal actually told us that they had recently had to resort to hiring 2 teachers from Canada after they had no applicants apply from within Australia. But you can see here in terms of Lily, who's one of the teachers who was involved in QTR Digital, the extent to which this involvement in PD actually made her feel that she was in the right place and actually increased and motivated her, increased her desire and motivated her to continue working at the school. So importantly, what QTR Digital really did for her in terms of having that collaborative professional development and working with other teachers in regional and remote schools and small schools, it really affirmed for her that working in a rural school was for her. And you can see here as well, in particular, that it was being able to see this kind of dual teacher leader role and being able to get a sense of how that was able to be achieved at other schools. And importantly for her, you can see in the highlighted blue quote right there at the end, where she said she's actually made the decision to stay again next year and hoping to go down the path of doing some assistant principal work. So really the PD in her involvement was really a strong motivator for her to continue working in this school community. For the secondary teachers at the school, what we also heard was this sense of what is often referred to in research as curriculum isolation. So where there might only be one teacher working in the different disciplines within the secondary school. And here, Mia, who's a history teacher at the school, at the start of the quote, she describes the consequences of that sense of curriculum isolation. But then there's a stark contrast to what she was able to find and discover about herself and her teaching through QTR Digital. So in particular here, I just wanted to highlight where she speaks right at the end about how this former PD was really affirming for her. As she says there, it's really great for morale, and it's given her a bit of a boost. And she knows that she is doing a good job, and she has been able to get that really kind of positive feedback. So contrasting that to what she says at the start, where she said she feels quite isolated and she doesn't have anyone else to bounce ideas off. So importantly, here in her professional learning community, she didn't actually work with other history teachers, but it was just that the experience of being able to connect and speak quite deeply about pedagogy that was really affirming for her. What we also found in a lot of the schools, and at this school in particular, was that their participation in QTR and also the use of the model and being able to reflect on teaching through the quality teaching model gave them a chance to really think more deeply about how to address the learning needs of their students. And at this particular school, just to provide a little bit more context, it actually has about 60% Indigenous Australian enrolment. So through their participation in QTR and being able to reflect on their practice, you can see here that Lily, who's a primary teacher, she's able to really think about how she wasn't actually putting that cultural perspective into the lesson as much as she could, and really now starting to think more deeply about how she can do that better in the future. And also at this school, what we found, and again, thinking about this idea of strength-based perspectives to pedagogy and to professional learning, was it really also shifted educators' perspective of what they should be doing in terms of their teaching and learning. And Mia here, who is the history teacher, like I mentioned before, where she's now thinking quite differently about her pedagogy and really now trying to incorporate more place-based learning and local culture into her teaching. So you can see there that real kind of shift to thinking in quite a strength-based way about the community and how that can be drawn on in quite a positive manner for the students' benefit. And now I'll just briefly touch on another case study school, so Lescon Hill Public School. And again, that's a pseudonym, and all of the participant names are pseudonyms as well. So at this particular school, we conducted interviews with the principal and one teacher. So when we, back in 2021, when we worked with this school, the school's enrolment sat around about 40 students and had a teaching staff of around 4. So the school draws its student population from the town itself and nearby properties, which all up in the broader community has around 600 residents. It's also important to note, for a little bit of contextual information, that the school is actually only located 30 minutes from Queanbeyan, for those of you who are familiar with New South Wales and the ACT, and only less than an hour's drive from Canberra. Nevertheless, what we found quite often at the start of the interviews or the start of the year was that this sense of the school and the educators feeling quite marginalised and excluded from the profession, as you can see here in the quote from Jeremy, who's the principal at the school. And here in his quote, what he's really speaking about is this sense of that it's not just the distance that really matters, it's people's perception of the distance. And that people will pick to become a teacher or look for work in Canberra or Queanbeyan, because then unfortunately people can get better pay and better conditions at other schools. And what he had been doing is trying to actually start to build connections with other schools. But you can see there right at the end of his quote where he says that he's been feeling this kind of sense of being dismissed by other schools, where he says, oh, Lescon Hill, off you go, because all of these other schools aren't interested in working with Lescon Hill or working with him and his teachers. And Sarah was one of the teachers at the school that we worked with and who was involved in the interviews. And what she spoke a lot about was that originally Lescon Hill was a central school, But in the years leading up to when we worked with them, the school had become now a primary school and just operated a single K-6 class. So all of their teaching was done quite flexibly in that one class, with students grouped according to development rather than to age. And what we often heard was that while that's quite often the norm in these small and rural schools, that form of pedagogy and that form of teaching and learning can actually be quite often overlooked in professional learning. And unfortunately for teachers like Sarah, having that their realities of their teaching and learning overlooked in PD actually continued to create that sense of marginalisation from the profession. And you can see here, ultimately, that it's not just the logistical constraints of attending PD that is a challenge or that matters to rural educators, but it's also the relevance of what's on offer. So you can see here where she speaks a lot about how forms of PD that she sees as quite idealistic versions of teaching or textbook versions of teaching. And the realities that she faces are quite different to what's usually on offer. So here is a quote where we start to get a sense at the end of the year of what she was able to benefit through Quality Teaching Rounds Digital. So importantly, because it was a form of PD where she was working with people who really understood her context and they themselves were also working in similar contexts, she really started to feel this sense of being included and this sense again of affirmation. So she says here, I gained a lot hearing feedback from colleagues working in the same context and that she valued that more. And the feedback was particularly relevant to her because they know what it's like to teach in a small school. And I like there right at the end where she speaks about being with a like-minded cohort. So finding that feedback and that whole process of working together in a collaborative way really beneficial because she's working with people who understand her and understand her pedagogy. Importantly, if you think back to the quote from Principal Jeremy at the start, where there was this sense of feeling excluded or marginalised, what was really important about this school's benefits from participating in the professional development is that it also started to forge these inter-school connections, as you can see here in the quote from Sarah. So she says here, since QTR, that's formed a relationship between our schools. So that's really linked our small schools together. So it's not just about that, that kind of focus on teaching and learning and pedagogy, but also has these added benefits of providing that collaboration and those links to other schools. And what was really exciting at this particular school, at the end of the project, what they were hoping to now do is actually use this approach to PD to hopefully bring some of these benefits to other schools. So Principal Jeremy here, he speaks about trying to now share the benefits across the system. So what we're looking at doing now is how can we develop a model that's sustainable throughout a whole school network. So really thinking now about how that they can now foster some of these benefits and be a leader, or as he says, take a leadership role in actually taking this approach to PD across their network. So you can see here a real kind of shift in his tone. So at the start of the year when we first met him and first interviewed him, quite that sense of feeling quite excluded and quite marginalised, and now actually a sense of excitement, actually now using this approach to PD to form new relationships and build new collaborations. So just in summary, and to wrap up what I've just kind of presented, is that it's important, through our approach to quality teaching rounds, what we really wanted to do is shed light on the importance of working with and for rural educators, but taking this strength-based approach to how we can actually place value on rural forms of pedagogy, rural forms of teaching and learning. And really that sense of making sure that rural education is not seen as deficit, but it's a form of pedagogy and form of working, form of teaching and learning that has its unique ways and has its own value that's distinct from working in rural, in metropolitan areas. So we've seen, for instance, at Heron Central School that QTR Digital helped to rectify both curriculum and professional isolation, helped to validate ways of working, and as we saw with the quote, that then helped teachers to actually feel like they wanted to stay on at the school and not feel the draw card of being lured back to the city. And also helped to foster new kinds of pedagogy to better address the needs of their students and their community. And then at Lescon Hill Public School, their participation in QTR Digital really helped to begin to overturn that sense of marginalisation and exclusion they were feeling from the profession, but also importantly, generating new opportunities and connections for them as a form of empowerment that they could then move forward with themselves. So just to wrap up, I did also want to highlight, if you'd like to find out more about Quality Teaching Rounds or about Quality Teaching Rounds Digital, so you can please get in touch with me, or you can scan the QR code there. We do have a number of government funded projects being run at the moment that you can find out more about. And there's my contact details as well. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, send us an email or reach out via Twitter.
Sally, thank you. And I think there's a number of really interesting things that came out of that. And I was, thinking as you were speaking and sharing the stories of those two schools in particular, how it resonates with the experience, a lot of the experience of, say, CEP staff that are travelling across rural and remote Victoria, and hearing similar stories and similar themes that are coming through that work that you've done. So it's great to see it collected and great to see it researched and great to see something that you can reflect on that is evidence-based and research.
Yes.
I like the idea that you spoke about with not just a focus on teaching and learning, but that sense of belonging and that sense of finding like-minded people is a real attraction in that space.
Yeah.
Which led me to the question about, it's probably broader, maybe taking a step back, like the role of universities in this space. Have you got a broad comment about, from what that experience and what you've seen and what you've heard, what we could reflect onto our universities in this sector going forward that could be useful and helpful?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that really stood out for me in doing some of the interviews and then doing all of the analysis is how better we can, I think we need to do better in terms of universities, in terms of that focus on rural education as part of our ITE programs, because I think still quite often, I know at UON, for instance, that a lot of graduate teachers are taking up positions in rural areas, but we quite often don't really address rural education that well, I think, in ITE programs. And particularly when graduates are going out into these areas, they're often relocating away from family, friends, so they're starting anew. And I think there's still more to do in that juxtaposition between how we're setting up people for success, I think, is really important. And something like QTR Digital, where we're actually now at UON starting to incorporate some of these approaches into ITE, so they at least get a sense of this before they're out into the classroom. But I think what's really important is to think about some of the principles of QTR Digital and QTR in terms of those connections, in terms of that sense of collaboration, which I think is something that can be, I think, maybe facilitated a little bit more broadly by universities as well, not only in ITE, but also facilitating that when they get out in the classroom as well.
Yeah, and I guess that preparedness, how much can you prepare for something when you haven't experienced it, and that balance between having some preparedness, but also a bit thrown into a different environment and stuff, and on the run trying to pick things up, but having really good people around you, which is key. Yeah,
that's right. And I think what stood out, and you just mentioned it too, was having that like-minded cohort. So we know from research, like so many studies now have shown the challenges of being able to participate in PD. But we know the importance of having collaborative forms of PD. Yep. So through approaches such as QTR Digital, being able to have people match up with a like-minded cohort and being able to provide those relationships with others who are working in similar contexts, I think is really important.
Yeah, and thank you, because it really resonates with the things that we're hearing and seeing in rural Victoria as well. So there's obviously a lot of common ground as we get out into rural Australia, and the work that you're doing, I think, is second to none. And I was going to ask a question about the broader community and families in this space, but I think we might see. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions, Maddie. Can't see if anyone has got a question at this stage. We can come back, obviously, Sally, and get some questions a little later on. But at this point, I want to just thank you for sharing that. That's really awesome. I've probably got another 10 questions, but I won't do that now. But I really appreciate what you've shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Steve's clapping, so that's great. I like that. And Maddie's smiling, so that's 2 out of 2.
I think Steve's clapping because he's my colleague, so.
Oh, well, yeah, but I'm sure it's unbiased. I see Julia's clapping, people are clapping. And I'm sure if Brendan was anywhere around, he would be clapping as well. But thank you. We really appreciate that. We're going to move on now to hear from one of our key sponsors today. And I want to introduce John Guenther, who's a research leader in education and training. And he's with the Batchelor Institute based in Darwin in the Northern Territory. I'm hoping I am correct, John. And focused on building an evidence base for policy and practice, mainly in the fields related to education and training, and particularly as they intersect with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, which I think is a nice segue to something that Sally touched on in that space in terms of schools with a high cohort in that space, and I guess throwing some of our teachers to the wolves in say whether they're prepared enough to be able to do that. But through Sally's work, we're getting there. And now, John, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. So thanks for joining us, John, and over to you.
Thanks very much. And I've got some slides to share, so I'm just going to have a go at this, if I can.
Absolutely fine.
Just see. Now, share that. Just bear with me whilst I make this the full size. Does that look like a presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, thank you for the introduction, and I think you got most of those details right. At the moment, I'm in Alice Springs. I'm at Mbantua, Aranda country, away from my home, but definitely in terms of being rural and remote, this is about as rural and remote as it gets, apart from if you keep on going further into the desert or into some of the islands. And this afternoon here, I'm representing SPERA, the Society for Provision of Education in Rural Australia, and particularly the Australian and International Journal of Rural Education, for which I'm the chief editor. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the journal and what it's on about, and I guess encourage anyone who wants to share what they've learned. Sally, there'd be a great opportunity for you to sort of share an article into the journal about your work, or anyone else that's a practitioner and they've got some story that they want to tell. We have a space for both the academic and the practitioner-based articles, which I'll come to in a moment. But before we do go on, I just want to acknowledge that country that I'm on, the Aranda country, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And acknowledge also the richness of this country. I'm in Alice Springs at the moment, and Alice Springs often gets into the news for all the wrong reasons. And sometimes you get an impression of a place based on what's on the media from time to time. But there is so much good about this place that it's important not to forget that this place has a rich history that goes well beyond the couple of hundred years that white people have been here, and has a rich environment. The red rocks and the blue skies and the beautiful open spaces that exist in these places make it an incredibly beautiful place to visit and a great place to live. I have lived in Alice Springs for 3 years between 2011 and 2014, so I'm not unfamiliar with the environment here. But since the end of 2014, I've been living in Darwin on Narrowcare country. So glad you introduced QR codes there, Sally, because there's a QR code that'll take you straight to the journal's web page. If you want to have a look at, whilst I'm talking there, feel free to sort of click on the link there with your phone, and you'll get an idea of the kind of articles that are in the journal. So this journal is predominantly about rural education, not just in Australia, but globally. It's called the Australian and International Journal of Rural Education. So increasingly we are getting articles that come from rural locations all around the globe. And some really interesting articles, I think, that are coming through. In recent months, we've had articles that have been from Peru in South America, from Nepal, Bhutan is one that's sort of coming up soon. Certainly many African countries and some of the Nordic and East European countries increasingly as well. So we're not just about Australian research, and we're not just about Australian practice. We're sort of taking articles from around the globe, and that makes it somewhat unique. A lot of the other rural education journals are really focused in on one place, either America or Europe. We take a fairly diverse view, but our aim is really to promote the development of rural education scholarship in terms of research and practice, to disseminate innovative ideas and actions and programs and policies in rural education, to link people interested in providing quality learning experiences in rural contexts, and providing a forum for new ideas and innovations in rural education. And most importantly, for sharing information and findings related to rural education issues and the development of programs. So it's pretty broad ranging, but just think rural and education and everything in between, and you've got it. You would be familiar with some of the people that are on the editorial team that I've listed here and our advisory board. There are many Australian familiar faces there, some too from the University of Newcastle, Sally. So we have Sue Ledger and Bronwyn Rolfe from there, but other luminaries like John Halsey, who's on our advisory board, and who's actually the patron for SPIRA as well. So these are well-respected names that contribute to the SPIRA journal.
John, can I just suggest you go to, if you can, go to full slide mode, because I think we've got a number of your slides all showing.
Oh, right, okay. No, I thought that I had them there, but so that's the aims. I tried to go to full slide mode, but that's not showing as full slide.
John, maybe
That is now.
if you go to slideshow at the top,
Mm-hmm.
along that bar at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So that at the top of your...
Stop sharing, right? Just hang on a second. So if I go share, yep.
Yep. So if you share your screen again.
Yep. And the one that's got the full screen, how's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'll just recap there.
Excellent. Technology on the run. We love it.
Yeah, love it. Yep. That might make the QR code a little bit easier there. I won't say all that stuff again, but there's I can see that list of names there would be a bit small. But just to say, well, look, the journal has got a team of people that are well respected, both as practitioners, policy makers, informing policy, and as practitioners as well, that are behind it. I guess to plug the journal, it's an open access journal, so you can find any article that's published through this journal. It won't cost you a bean. You don't have to go through a library. You don't have to pay anything, and you can download whatever you like. So that's one advantage of it. We are getting something like 7,000 downloads per month. So the readership is sort of, a few years ago, was maybe 1,000 downloads per month, and now we're getting 7,000. So the readership has gone up quite a bit, and we have sort of made a concerted effort over the last few years to promote it better, to improve the quality of the journal and so on. But you've got articles in there that go right back to 1991, since the first issue of the journal. More than 500 contributions over that time. And I can tell you that it's quite a fascinating exercise, sort of going back into the archives and seeing what people wrote about 30 years ago, because in some ways the topics are the same. The way that they are expressed might be a little bit different, but there's a richness in the variety of the articles that are provided there. So I encourage you to go and have a look, browse your way through. There's a search option there when you go to the home page. You can then look for a particular author or a particular topic, and it will then come up with what you're looking for. So that's all I really wanted to share, just to give you that bit of background. I encourage you to to read the articles. If you are ever invited to review, don't be shy. We depend on reviewers to actually make the articles as good as they possibly can be. So if you've got that interest, please feel free to volunteer to review. And if you've got something worth sharing, then we would love to receive an article. So we have two types of articles. The first is the academic kind of article that's normally based on research, or it could be a theoretical article. And the second type of article is a more practitioner-based article. So in the next issue coming up, we'll have some practitioners talking about language and literacy and numeracy for a range of programs in Northern Territory. We're going to have an article about a school in West Arnhem Land. We'll have articles we might even have an article about a school in Western Australia as well. So it's that sort of place-based practice that we are looking for, that teachers, principals, practitioners in general can share their knowledge and their experiences through those practice-based articles. And then the academic articles are more for the university kind of people, or people that might be higher ed students that really want to have a go at putting something together that's a little bit more scholarly and a bit more research-based. But if anyone's got any questions beyond this session, there's my contact details, mobile phone or email would be fine. So thank you very much. I don't know whether anyone does have any questions about the journal.
I was just going to ask Sally if she wanted to have any feedback there at all, but I was going to ask you, John, before then, if you do find that you get a lot of information that is specific to the really rural and remote areas of Australia, are you getting a lot of input from those spaces? Because not having read your stuff yet, but I will, that's a fascinating area for all of us, and it ties in with what Sally was talking about in terms of some of the differences with remote and rural. So do you get a lot of information from that particular sectors?
Yeah, look. If I can just share one more, I'll share the journal's webpage so that you can see it a little bit more specifically. I'll just make sure I'm on the right page here. Go to their online first section and share that. And so you should see now a web page.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So if I go to our online first, which they haven't been put into an issue yet, but they're about to be, this is probably representative of the various kinds of articles. So we have our journal papers, which are the academic ones, but look at this list of rural connections. These are the more practice-based articles. So a case study from a remote school at Yearley in central Kimberley. It doesn't get much more place-based than that.
Absolutely.
Building language, literacy, numeracy and digital skills with Aboriginal Rangers in the Northern Territory. Again, very much place-based, focused on a particular issue in adult learning in that case. And a case study of Nuwardikan Academy, which is an independent school in West Arnhem Land. Again, you don't get much more place-based than that. We love those kind of articles because they speak to teachers' experiences, to people that are in community, to sometimes students even get a voice. So they're very much focused in on what's actually happening on the ground in schools and in education settings. We're not just focused on schools, we're focused on any form of education. in the journal papers, again, the variety is pretty great. You know, I mean, there's one about responsive, culturally responsive boarding, you know, leadership, you know, that intersection of geography and topography and mindset, and school retention. These are all very topical kind of issues that sort of apply probably more generally across rural and remote parts of Australia. So does that sort of answer your question?
Absolutely, and what it does, just seeing it on the screen there, and it ties in again with what Sally was saying about sometimes how we can feel quite isolated and alone and in our own. But even looking at those articles, thinking, oh, I think I could read some of those and it would help connect me with some of my own stories that I feel isolated with. Sally, did you want to comment? Because I can see the link there and I can see that work sort of crossing over.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the journal. So the project I just spoke about, we recently just had that published in Asia Pacific Journal of Teacher Education, but we cite a number of articles from your journal, John. And yeah, we do a lot of work with Sue Ledger, who's on the board, so very familiar with it. And
yes, of course.
We draw on a lot of that work. And even I think you do some work with Hernan Cuervo, and his kind of theory. His kind of theorization of that recognitional justice, which I touched on in the presentation.
Yes.
We draw on some of his work in that as well. So yeah, very familiar with it, and I think it's a great space and great journal.
I've actually asked Hernan to share some of that stuff about his theories in the editorial for the next issue. So look out for that.
Yeah, that'll be great.
That's fantastic. So I'm not sure, I don't know that anyone else had any other questions at this point in time. So we are probably going to do something that we very rarely ever do, that we are going to run slightly ahead of time, which is quite awesome. And I'm going to I'm going to put Maddie on the spot just quickly. Maddie, I know that the poll is open, so if people want to fill that in, I should pay more attention to what Brendan says at the end of the session. I haven't got a sheet in front of me of what next week's theme is. Could you just quickly have that and just share with what our third session next week, the title is?
Yep. So next week we have a love of reading, and we have some great speakers lined up, including Madonna King, who's a co-author of Out of the Box. And they actually have a really great offer for all CEP members. So it's a great session to join. And all recordings are going to be on YouTube, so you can all watch it and share the link with anyone who you think could benefit from the recording. And on behalf of CEP, we thank you all for joining. And I believe that's all Brendan usually says, Morris.
Yes. No, and Maddie likes to be behind the scenes, but we've put her in front of the camera today. And she's done particularly well. So thank you for that, and we look forward to seeing people next week. The man that always appears right at the end as we're about to leave is our CEO, Mark. I don't know whether, Mark, you can hear us. We do have a minute or two if you wanted to share some final thoughts.
Well, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And I had a speaker lined up here. She's left, so I managed to avoid. So at Malakuta P12 school today, and was at their staff meeting, getting with many ideas and things that P12s and CEP can be doing.
And did you want to promote any of CEP's upcoming stuff while we've got a minute or two?
So next week's PD Online, two amazing opportunities will be announced officially. One is the Rural Education Forum, and one is a New Zealand educational excursion. And those who log in next week's PD Online will have a 2-day head start, because both things numbers are limited. So anyone who's on PD Online next Wednesday will get a 2 days head start to everyone else, because it would officially come out in Bush Voices on the Friday.
Are you saying those people will go to New Zealand 2 days before everyone else?
However you wish to interpret it, Morris. They aren't limited numbers on both, so once they're full, they're full.
That's fine.
But no, both the New Zealand trip especially looks amazing, and the New Zealand Rural Schools Association is putting it all together for us. So it's an amazing opportunity, and they will be in Melbourne in March also to hopefully we got the group by then who can meet up with our friends from across the ditch. So we're all very much looking forward to it. And my apologies for being late.
No, that's okay. And just a quick word on Energy Breakthrough, which is only a couple of weeks away.
Yeah, it's not far away. Entries closed a couple of weeks ago. We will say, if anyone watching this hasn't been involved and would like to and wants to come and get some VIP treatment, get a tour behind the scenes, get taken into some tents, we offer that service. You just have to get in touch with us. And that is often the best way to get involved, is to go and get a feel for the event. And we're really excited with the robotics being part of the World Challenge and having the team from Texas, I believe, out here to view how we do. So I think we've gone from maybe 8 teams to 26 in robotics. So it's very exciting.
Looking forward to seeing you in a 10-gallon hat. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mark, for that update. Thanks for jumping in right at the end there. I know that you're a very busy man, so that's awesome with the catch-up. Thanks, Maddie, for being Brendan. Thanks, Brendan, for being you initially, but not being you in the end. And particularly thanks, Sally and John, for joining us today and sharing your wonderful words, wisdom, research, and opportunities. It was fantastic, really worth listening to. And no doubt we would look forward to having you back on again sometime in the future. So with that, Maddie, I will say thank you to everyone and bon voyage, and have a lovely rest of the afternoon.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.